Hi there, welcome to another one of MyHowTos in Fusion. This time it will be grids, and I will call this grids part 1. What I want to do is show you how I would make a grid of cells that could be used, let's say, as a game board for different types of games. I'll probably do this over a couple different videos, and I'll begin with the creation of the cells that will make up the grid. I will also show you how I would auto-center the grid in the center of the frame, regardless of the grid size or regardless of the frame size. And I will show you how I would add like a checkerboard style to the grid, so like a checkerboard effect. Now, to save some time on this video, I have already started a new application in Fusion, and I called it Grid. I have added 2 objects. I added an active to use as the cell. I gave it a couple of animations to use for the checkerboard effect. See, I gave it an alterable value that I called cell ID. I added a string object, and I will use this to display the cell ID of each cell, and this will help to better explain the whole process that I do here. I've added some global values. Cell size, this is the size of each cell's width and height. Columns and rows, they be used to determine the size of the grid. The grid X and the grid start X and the grid start Y will be used to determine the starting position of the grid, and the grid type is used to display the checkerboard type that we will use when we do the checkerboard effect. So to get started, I will go into the events, and I'm going to create a new group of events, and I will call this group simply grid for now. And we'll leave it active at frame start. Let's see, and I'll add a couple more groups under this group. And I will call the first one create cells, unchecked, active when frame starts. Create another group of events, and I will call it checkerboard. We'll call it checkerboard. Checkerboard grid. Uncheck active when frame starts. Oh, I should add another one up here, and I will call it grid setup values. Unchecked active when frame starts. I'll be adding more stuff to these inside these groups in future videos. First event, group activation. I'm going to activate the grid setup values. Inside of here, I'm going to be adding some events, but before I get to that, I need to create the cells, and I'll come back to this. So for now, I'll just simply create only when actually when event loops, we are going to deactivate that group, and we're going to activate the create cells. Bear with me. There's a reason for this. I'll come back and add some additional events in here. So first thing is to create the cells that will make up the grid, and we'll simply do that with a fast loop. I'm not going to explain fast loops because I'm sure you know all about them. So let's see here. Let's do a on group activation. We're going to start a loop. And we will call this loop columns. And run the loop. Use our global value. Columns. Good. Now, on loop. Columns. We're going to start another loop. And we'll call it rows. And we will run this one row amount of times. Now we should probably put some values in here in the global values. Our cell, as you can see, is 64 by 64. So we're just going to enter that into our global value cell size. Columns, we'll run it, we'll make a grid of 9 by 9, so 9 rows by 9 columns. And for the grid X and grid start X and the grid start Y, we'll put, we'll leave it at 0 for now. Back into the events. Oops. Oh boy. Okay, so on loop rows, we are going to start creating our grid. So create a new cell, and you can position it anywhere because it's not going to matter. We're going to position through the events here. So we'll just say, actually what I like to do is just create it off screen. Great. And now the common way of doing this would be to set its X position. We're going to use the global value grid start X plus loop index, and the loop index is columns. Oops. Times cell size. We'll do the same thing for its Y position. So we're going to set it to the global value grid start Y plus loop index. And this time it's rows times the global value cell size. Now if I run this the way it is, it creates the grid of cells. So there's actually 9 by 9 here, but you can see it's off of the screen here. And the reason for that is the hotspot. The hotspot of my cell is in the center. If I was to set that to the top left, like the default position, and I was to run it, you can see that it starts the grid of cells at 0, 0 and builds it out. Now if we were to put in the global values at the grid X start, let's say we put 200 and we run it, you can see it started the grid at 200 pixels on the X coordinates. And if I was to do the same for the grid start Y and then run it, and then it creates it at 200 pixels on the Y coordinates. But of course we don't want that. We're going to auto center our grid. And the way I do that, and the formula that I would use, is as following. Under the grid setup values, we're going to say group activation and drag it above this event. We are going to set, these two values, the grid start, the start X and the start Y values. So we're going to set grid X start. This is the formula I use. I mean, obviously there's other ways of doing this. Two. Oh. What am I doing? Okay, frame width minus global value columns times global value cell size. We'll close that up. We'll divide that by 2. And then this last part is because the hot spot of the cell is in the center. If it wasn't in the center, then I wouldn't need this last part. But it is in the center, so I need to add cell size divided by 2 again. I hope you can figure this out. It should be pretty self-explanatory. Oops, where did I go? Up here. Okay. So we need to do the same thing for the Y. And I'm going to go to the list editor. I'm just going to copy that and change a few values. So here we go. Frame height this time times columns, or sorry, minus columns or rows, and that should be good. So what that essentially will do is center our grid in the center of the screen. Let's run it and see what happens. And that's obviously not centered, so let me see why. Oh, I know why. Because I put the hotspot of the cell in the top left. So let's put it back in the center there. Now try it. There. So now it's centered. So it shouldn't matter what values I put in here. So let's make it 10 by something ridiculous, 4. There, you see it's still centered. Move back to 9 by 9. There. So that centers the grid in the center of the screen, in the center of the frame, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so my cell has a value that I called cell ID. I'll be using that later for various things. But what I want to do essentially here is I want to be able to spread that value across all the cells. So I'm going to create a new condition down here. So one action when event loops, and what I want to do is I want to spread that value, the cell ID, at 1. Now, just so you can see what's going on, make a quick group here, call it debug, and let's say when the mouse is over the cell, we'll set the string to cell ID equals, and we'll retrieve the cell. Oh, we gotta do string convert here. We'll grab this, retrieve the cell's ID number. Like so. So if you watch the cell ID string up here, as I mouse over each one of these, it tells you this, the spread value that was set up. You can see number 1 starts down here in the bottom right corner, and as you move up, the number increases, and remaining with 81 is the last one. I don't like that. I like it better if so. I want it to start up in the top left corner. I want to go 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Basically opposite of what it's actually doing. Now, there's some easy ways to do this, and there's some hard ways to do this. This is the way I do it. This is the way I want to do it. And I'll show you the code or the formula that I use. And you can determine whether it's easy or not. Alright, so I have to change this right here. The set X position, the set Y position each time I create the cell. This might sound confusing, but it's the formula I use, and it works. So here we go. So for set the X position, I'm going to change a few things here. So set grid start X plus, and I'm going to go columns -1 times cell size minus the loop index times cell size. I think I have that right. Yeah, looks right. Now for the Y position, I'm going to go start Y plus rows -1 times cell size, and again minus the loop index. Now what happens when we run it now? You can see I got the mouse over here, and the cell ID of this cell is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on down to the last one, which is 81. That's how I want it. That's how I want to use it. So yeah. What else? Okay, let's change this and do a checkerboard grid. So one action when event loops, let's spread the cell ID, and we're going to deactivate this group and activate the checkerboard grid. Now I'll show you the formula that I use to create the checkerboard grid. Group activation, we're going to start a loop for the cells, so for each loop with the cells, and we'll simply call it checkerboard. Now on loop checkerboard, we're going to compare two general values here. We're going to say X position divided by cell size plus its Y position divided by the cell size. Close that up. We'll do a mod 2. If it equals, we'll say 1, we're going to force its animation frame to 1. And because of the way Fusion works, I have to do this again and change this to 0 and change this to 0. We'll close this group up. Now when I run it, it's not going to do anything yet, because in here where we created the cells, we need to one second here. Yeah, we need to change the animation sequence. And we're going to use a calculation this time. Oh, hang on. You didn't see that because it was off screen. We'll use a calculation, and we'll do the grid type global value. And we'll change the global value for the grid type to 12, which is the animation we have here, grid type 1. It's actually 12. So it's number 12. Now if we run it, you can see that it does that nice little checkerboard effect. If we change the grid type to 13, which is essentially this one, and run it, there you go. So that's it. That's it for this one. I'll do part 2. And in part 2, I'll show you how I make a border around the grid and how I implement the holes into the grid, and while still allowing for the border to wrap around the grid with the holes. You'll see. It'll be neat. Okay, that's it for now. I'll upload this example so you can see it. Play around with it if you want. Cheers.